as I was saying, this is the first multiple choice question is on a specific factors model. And in the sort of canonical setup of the specific factors model, we're going to assume that land is the specific factor that's used in agriculture, and capital is the specific factor that's used in manufacturing, and labor is going to be the mobile sector that can go across the two industries. Now, just to highlight the important parts that we need to keep in mind, we're going to suppose that the price of manufacturing the price of agricultural goods decreases by 5%, and the price of manufacturing goods increases by 5%. So, and then the amount of labor in manufacturing increases by 2%. And so it asks which of these is a possible outcome for RK over RT. And just to sort of go back, I find it's helpful to sort of explain what RK is. If we think that W is the wages of laborers, then RK is just the wages of owners of capital or capitalists. And then RT is basically the wages or the returns to the owners of the factor that is land. So it's just the wages of basically landowners. And so the question is going to ask, given that we know that PA is going to decrease by 5%, PM is going to increase by 5%, and LM is going to increase by 2%, which of these is a possible outcome for the way that RK over RT moves? So it increases by 0%, 5%, 10%, or 15%. Okay, so I'm going to walk through how I would sort of think about this. Well, sort of regardless of which sort of model we're in, we're always going to have that each factor is going to be paid as marginal revenue product. That's because in all of these models that we've seen so far, we have perfect competition in both the factor and output markets. And so RK is equal to PM, that's the price of the output in the sector in which it's used in, times MPK. And then RT is equal to the price of agriculture, that's the output in the sector, that's the output price of the sector that it is used in, times the marginal product of land. And so if we just take that all as a fraction, we know that RK over RT is equal to PM times MPK over MPT. And so all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to remember that if, for instance, I want to figure out what is the percentage change of RK over RT, then I'm going to go back to section 0 where I sort of introduced percentage change rules. And I'm going to note that anytime you have a multiplication of two things, in percentage change rules, that's just adding up two things. So if, for instance, I have these two terms, PM over PA and MPK over MPT, then that percentage change is going to be whatever the percentage change of the first term is, plus whatever the percentage change is of the second term. Okay, so that's one part of it. But then another rule that section 1 goes over is that if I have, for instance, a fraction, then this fraction, this percentage change in PM over PA, is also equal to the percentage change in PM minus the percentage change in PA. And likewise, I can do the same for MPK. And so this is the percentage change in MPK minus the percentage change in MPT. And if my handwriting is terrible, which I know it is, then I can just write that down a little bit more clearly in terms of the slides. Okay, so now all we need to do is we need to sort of figure out the direction that each of these factors is going to change. So we know that the price of manufacturing goods is going to, oops, that's not what I was wanting to do. We know that the price of manufacturing goods is going to increase by 5%. And so the change in PM is 5%. The change in PA it decreases by 5%, so it's going to be negative 5%. And so we can see that this 5% minus negative 5%, or sorry, 5% minus negative 5% is going to add up to give us 10%. And then we still have to get a handle on the way MPK and MPT change. But for instance, if we know that the labor in manufacturing increases by 2%, then recall that in the specific factors model, all of our the only two sectors that we have are going to be agriculture and manufacturing, and so that's the entire group of sort of industrial sectors that we have in our economy. And so if LM is increasing by 2%, then that must come at the expense of LA. So as labor is moving into manufacturing, laborers must be moving out of agriculture into that manufacturing sector. And so in general, I don't know exactly by how much LA is increasing. It depends on sort of the initial stock of labor in each sector, but certainly I can't have an increase in one sector without having a decrease in the other sector, because we always assume in our models that we always have full employment. So if you add up labor working in both sectors, you're always going to have the total amount of labor in the economy. And so what can we say? Well, when we have that the labor in agriculture decreases, then that's going to imply that for every unit of land, it has fewer laborers working that individual unit. And so if you have a lot of workers working an individual piece of land, you might think that that plot of land is really productive. Likewise, if you have few workers working an individual plot of land, you might think that it's less productive. And so as the amount of labor in agriculture decreases, then the marginal product of land decreases. Likewise, as we have more workers for each capital unit, then each capital unit becomes more productive because it has more workers who are able to sort of make sure that that sort of piece of capital is running efficiently. And so likewise, we know that the marginal product of capital is going to increase. And so what does that tell us? Then we know that this is increasing and this is decreasing, but this here is a minus term. And so therefore we must, we're able to conclude that the percentage change in RK over RT must be greater than 10%. And so the only option that gives us greater than 10% is this increases by 15%. And so the answer here is 4. Any questions about that? Okay. So let's move on, going quickly through some multiple choice questions on the specific factors model. Again, we're going to have the same setup where capital is used in manufacturing, and we have land used in agriculture, and then labor is obviously mobile between the two. We're going to assume that we have a decrease in the price of agricultural goods, or the percentage change in PA is less than 0. And we want to ask what the following effects are going to be on the rental rate of capital, the rental rate of land, and wages W. Well, the correct answer is 4, and the reason is that if we assume that the price of agriculture is less than 0, then we know that that the factor that's used in the production of agriculture must be losing out by greater than that in terms of absolute value than that change in prices. And so RT must be the one that's losing out more than the decrease in the price of agriculture. So we know that this part is true. We also have that whenever the relative price of one sector goes down, it's going to and only that sector, it's going to benefit the other sector's returns. And so we know that if, for instance, the relative price of agriculture is going to go down, then the relative price of manufacturing, then we're going to have the owners of the factor whose output price is not decreasing, we're going to have their returns go up or increase. So we want to have that RK is going to be greater than 0. However, in general, the fall in the price of agriculture, it's going to affect our economy negatively, and so the change in the workers' wages is going to be less than 0. So that's how I would think through a question like this. Does anyone have any questions about that? So please feel free to interrupt me. But now what I'm going to consider is I'm going to consider changing a variable and see how it affects the export supply curve from before. So I'm going to think that everything stays the same in home, but population is going to double in foreign. So recall that in foreign, we had that the labor force was 1. now we're just going to consider that the total labor force in foreign is now 2. And then the question asks how this is going to affect the relative price of good 1 in autarky when both countries are open to trade, and then to sort of illustrate that with an export supply and import demand diagram. So let's just run through sort of the effects that it has. The first thing is that when population doubles in foreign, autarky prices are not affected. And because what you can just sort of quickly look is that the relative price of good 1 in foreign is just a function, an inverse function of its relative productivities. And so population changing does not change its productivities of labor. And so its autarky price, its autarky relative price of good 1 is left unchanged. Likewise, we can think about import demand, which is Home's side of the equation. Home's import demand does not change since its income, production, all of those things haven't changed. And so when we go to graph its import demand curve, that's going to look exactly the same as what we had before. What does change, though, is going to be foreign production. So we don't have any change on autarky prices, so we have no change in sort of the ranges in which both countries are going to choose to specialize. So like before, we're going to have that foreign is going to have a comparative advantage in good 1. But now what we're going to have is we're going to have that, if we just look at foreign's production function of good 1, which is linear in labor, we can just plug in now we know that, again, like before, foreign's going to fully specialize in good 1. So we can just replace L1F with the total labor force in foreign, which instead of being 1 as before is now 2. And so now foreign's production of good 1 is going to double to 8. And so if we just now plug in foreign's new income into its consumption function for good 1, we're just going to see that relative to what it was before, consumption is going to double from 2, which is what it was before, to 4. So, but otherwise, its export supply is going to look the same. It consumes more, but it's going to choose to consume at the same relative prices. And so, as before, when the relative price, when the sort of world price, when we open up to trade, is less than 1, foreign's exports are going to be 0. Whenever prices are greater than 1, export supply is going to be 4. How do we know export supply is going to be 4? Recall again that export supply is just given by production minus consumption whenever that's positive. And so we can note that 8 minus 4 gives us that whatever we don't consume that we're producing locally must be exports. And then again, if foreign exports are 0 when the price is less than 1 and 4 when it's above, then at P1 it just must be somewhere in between those two. And so the only thing we have now is, in effect, graphically what this does is if this point was the sort of old foreign export supply, which I'm going to abbreviate as FES, it's going to shift out foreign's export supply. And so while we were sort of intersecting here before in this region, now we're going to intersect in the area in which you can note that the world price that's going to come out of this, just graphically speaking, is going to be equal to, so you can call this the world price, and that's going to be exactly equal to foreign's relative autarky price of good 1. So, so you can sort of see that in this case, foreign is going to get so large that its demand for good 2 is not going to be fully sated by the home country. And so in this case, when foreign opens up to trade, it's going to actually, with the world, it's going to actually have the same world price, face the same world price as what it was in autarky. And so to just derive the equilibrium, recall that I said that in this part of the curve, foreign export supply is anywhere between 0 and 4. And recall that when we're in this part of the curve, Home's import demand is given by 3 P1 over P2 inverse. And so recall that, again, we want to have that, again, we can't have that foreign's export supply is 0 whenever we go below 1. And so at this part, we're going to be at the part where P1 over P2 is equal to 1. And so the only place where we can have that these two intersect, or the only part that we can have where we have somewhere in between 0 and 4, and this home's import demand crossing is where the price is equal to 1. And so at that point, where P1 over P2 is equal to 1, we just have the home's import demand is 3, and we can just note that 3 is contained in the amount that foreign is willing to supply. So if foreign is willing to supply up to 4 and as little as 0, then foreign's just exporting 3. And of course, we have that whatever foreign's exporting to home, home's also importing from foreign. Any questions about that? Everyone is very quiet tonight, and please feel free to interrupt me at any point. I feel like I'm going way too fast, and so please, if you don't interrupt me, I just keep going, and I really want to make sure that I if you have questions, I'm able to cover them. So please, really feel free to ask questions. Okay. What I want to move on to is then a sort of multiple choice question, thinking about sort of terms of trade. And so what this problem is going to ask is that it's going to ask, in the specific factor model with 2 countries, home and foreign, we're going to suppose that foreign exports computers and imports textile. Suppose that foreign becomes larger, what's going to happen next? And so we have a variety of different outcomes. Terms for trade are either going to improve or worsen. Home is going to make more computers, or it's going to make fewer computers. And so whenever I see a question like this, I just go back to thinking about drawing an export supply and import demand curve. And so, for instance, we're thinking about foreign here doubling. So we could just say foreign doubles, so that to make it similar to the sort of problem that we had before, and that foreign was sort of exporting, let's call this good 1, and importing good 2 instead. Oops, this should say textiles. Sorry, this is a typo here. I thought I fixed this, but this should say textiles. But what we want to say is that recall that the price initially when foreign was smaller was given by the relative price of good 1 was 3 over 2 when foreign was smaller. Now it's increased towards foreign saw turkey price. However, having the price further away from its original price for home means that home actually has better terms of trade, and so home is going to benefit more. And so as foreign grows larger, the world price gets closer to foreign's, which is going to result in an improvement in the terms of trade for home. And so we must have either of these two, that home, the terms of trade for home are going to improve. And sorry about the typo, this should say textiles, but we want to then, because foreign is going to become larger, it'll have more demand for its imports, textiles, and so the correct answer is going to be 1. And sorry, I guess I fixed the typo in this slide, but not the other one. So home is going to make more textiles. So the correct answer is 1. And so I see. So okay. So I have one more question, and but feel free to, and then happy to take sort of any other questions that you have after that. I'm happy to sort of stick around. So instead of having foreign double, let's consider a different change. Let's consider what would happen instead if the productivity of home and producing good 2 decreases from, I think originally it was A2, or productivity of good 2 in home was 6. Let's suppose that it goes down to 4. And so basically what we're going to ask is how that's going to affect, relative prices in home, how it's going to affect the world price when both countries are open to trade. And then it wants us to sort of go through and sort of do a sort of export supply and import demand diagram and solve for the amount of trade of good one. So let's first ask what's going to change. So again, we've only changed things for home, and so foreign's production and income are not going to change at all. And why? It's because we've only changed productivities for good two in home, and so obviously no variable for foreign should change. However, unlike before, where we had doubled population, which didn't affect labor productivities, we are affecting labor productivities here. And so now, recall that the relative price of good one and home is equal to the inverse ratio of its labor productivities. And so when we decrease the productivity of home in good two from 6 to 4, we decrease home's relative autarky price from 2 to 4/3. And so that is, for one, it's going to shift down home's import demand curve, but we'll talk about that when I get to there. But recall before that home under full specialization was going to produce 6 units of good two when it had productivity labor productivity in good two given by 6. And so now with a lower labor productivity, it's only going to produce 4. And so home's income is also going to decrease. And it's going to decrease to 4 times P2. And so home can now also consume less. So the two factors which happen to home's import demand curve is it's going to shift down and it's going to shift left because to the left. Sorry, it's going to shift down. It's going to shift left because its autarky price is decreased and its income is decreased. So just to see that, if the sort of blue dotted line was home's import demand initially, then we have that home's import demand shifts down and it sort of shifts to the left. So, basically from before, home, I believe, I don't remember what point this is. I could probably figure that out. But home could import more. So for any level of the price, you can sort of look at here, home is going to want to import less, and that's because we've decreased its income. So for any level of the price, home is going to want to import less. And also we've decreased the relative price, and so there's going to be a smaller area in terms of prices under which home is going to want to fully specialize. So before, recall that home was going to want to fully specialize in the production of good two anywhere in this range. Now it only wants to fully specialize in the production of good two when it falls into this range. Anything above here and home is going to want to actually instead specialize in the production of good one. So I've left the rest for you to solve, but I just wanted to sort of walk you through how I think about these problems in terms of shifting export supply and import demand. And hopefully you can sort of see that that doing this results in essentially when home becomes less productive in the good that it specializes in, it has a similar, if not identical, effect to it's obviously not identical because it also shifts the autarky price, but it's a similar effect to foreign doubling its population insofar as foreign now is back to when we open up to trade, foreign stuck right back at its autarky price. And the reason is home has gotten less productive, and so they can consume less of one, its exports, but two, home can produce less of good two, which is what foreign wants to consume, and so it has to produce it locally now. So that share my screen. So which one was it?
Specifically, it was question 1 and 2, but specifically 2, essentially.
Specifically 2. Okay, let me see what question 2 is. So okay, so the MPL of clothing and home in 10, the MPL in software is 5, and so assume that the international price of Sorry, assume the home opens up to trade. Sorry, what was the first question?
First question was like autarky, right? So
Yeah, so sorry. And then now imagine the home opens to trade and the international. Okay. So the real wage for workers employed in the clothing sector in terms of clothing. Okay. So I'm going to try and see if I can write on here, and you tell me if this works or not.
okay.
Can you see this?
Yes, I can.
Great. Okay, so let's see. So I was sort of saying this earlier, but we have that basically in all of these models that we've seen so far, we have perfect competition in both the factor markets and in the output markets. And so, for instance, if we have workers in, in this case, it's the Ricardian model, so we have workers working in both sectors. We assume that when homes opens up to trade, that workers are stuck in the sectors. And so in particular, we might have here that workers working in clothing might not be making the same wage as workers in software. The reason is because when we have free labor and mobility, if workers were earning more in one sector, they could just all move to one sector rather than the other. But when they're stuck, they cannot. And so, but in any case, regardless of whether or not we have free labor mobility, we have that workers are paid their marginal revenue product of labor, which is to say that the wage is equal to the wage that a worker makes is equal to the output that one worker makes. That's the marginal product of labor. That's effectively what that is, times the price of whatever they make. And so the wages in both the sectors are going to be given by this. And so when we have free labor mobility, we have that these are equal. But in this case, as I said earlier, we're not going to have them be equal. So let's just divide each of these by, for instance, by the prices. And so what that's going to tell us is it's going to tell us that WC over PC is going to be given by MPLC, and WS over PS is going to be equal to MPLS. Okay, all of that is to say is that regardless of us being open up to trade, our real wage for workers employed in the sector in terms of the price of that good is going to be fixed. It's just going to be, so for instance, WC over PC, as long as the marginal productivity of labor in clothing doesn't change, sorry, I didn't draw, as long as the marginal productivity of labor in clothing doesn't change, it's always going to be 10. And as long as the MPL in software doesn't change, it's always going to be 5. And so the real wage for workers, for instance, employed in the clothing sector in terms of clothing, well, that's just WC over PC. And so that's going to be 10. So that doesn't change when we open up to trade. That's always going to be the case. Likewise, if we think about the real wage for workers employed in the software sector in terms of software, well, that's WS over PS. So that's always going to be 5. It doesn't matter whether or not we're in trade or not. That's always going to be the case. Let me erase this above so I have a little bit more room. Now, the trickier part is figuring out what the real wage is for workers employed in the software sector in terms of clothing. And so in math, what that is it's going to be WS over PC.
Okay.
Right. So effectively, what this is telling us is that if I'm a software worker and I spend all of my income on clothing, what's the number of units of clothing I can consume? Likewise, this is saying if I'm a software worker and I spend all of my income on software, what's the maximum number of software units I can consume? Okay, so this is a little different because we can't this is not equal to, for instance, don't be confused. This is not equal to MPLS because again, we don't have the sort of wages or sorry, this is not equal to MPLC, whatever you want to call it, because wages aren't equal across both sectors. So you can't do that. But what you can do is you can note that WS over PC is equal to WS over PC times a form of 1, which is basically PS over PS. So if you just divide PS by PS, that's just 1. So I've done nothing to this other than multiply it by 1. But what I can do is I can just re-scramble these denominators, that's fine. That's just reshuffling terms. And so I get WS times PS over PC. Where that's useful is I know WS over PS, so I can just plug in here. That's 5 times PS over PC. But what I know is that I know that the international relative price of clothing is 1 over 10. So what that tells me is that PC over PS is equal to 1 over 10. And so if I just PS over PC is just the reciprocal. And so what that gives me is that it's going to be 5 times 10. And so that's going to be 50. And so the relative wage for workers in the software sector in terms of clothing is going to be 50. And then just for completeness, because I hate doing a job half done, just to do the remaining one, just for completeness, let's look at wage for workers in the clothing sector in terms of software. So that's WC over WS. And so, oops, that's fine. And so that is just we can just rewrite that as WC over PC times PC over PS. And then this is WC over PC is 10 and PC over PS is 1/10. And so that's going to give us 1. And so the real wage for workers is going to be equal to 10. And let me double check that I got that right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think
this is what I recommend everyone to do when you're studying is do the problems ahead of time, and then don't look at the solutions until you've taken a crack at them, because active studying is always a far better way to study for these exams than just sort of passively reading through the lecture notes. It's always good to sort of try them out and then see where you sort of went wrong and use
right.
them.
Well, you just answered my next question. I was going to ask what I could do beyond just the practice exam.
Yeah. So, but just try to do problems basically, and just say, we've given you problems in section notes. We've given you practice problems. In the sort of review section notes that I just posted, there's even more problems. Obviously, you've just seen a couple of them, but just try to start from a blank page. Don't look at the solutions until you're done, but just try them all from a blank page yourself, and then try to come up with an answer, and then sort of compare that to the solutions. And then for some of the stuff that's more sort of detail oriented, I like to say that basically you want to sort of try to do problems as early as you can before the exam. And then I don't even, when I was a student, I wouldn't even read the section notes or the sort of like slides until a couple days, because until a couple days before. And the idea is that passive learning, the sort of memorization based learning, that is stuff that you can sort of cram into your head in the last couple of days before the exam. But the sort of problem-based learning is stuff that you really have to be doing on an active basis as the class goes along. So obviously, insofar as we have, I think at this point there's only 4 days before the midterm. I'd say get cracking on the problems.
Yeah.
But that's I like to prioritize sort of doing sort of longer, medium-term practicing problems first, and then some of the more sort of like just reading through the material type stuff. I like to do that sort of closer to the start of the exam. And I think there's some sort of evidence-based in neuroscience that's sort of the sort of right way to study for sort of math-based classes.
Got it. Well.